Welcome everybody. My name is Andrew Taylor from Countryside Properties, and I'll introduce the rest of the panel speakers in a moment. First of all, can I suggest that if you are not speaking, to keep your microphones on mute. This is different to all the plenary sessions where you don't get the option. So please make sure you're on mute, otherwise we might hear your comments offside. The idea of this session, and we are repeating it in an hour, so if you are so dedicated, you can continue and come back and see if we say the same things again. But the whole point about this session is thinking about engagement, empowerment, partnership and stewardship as part of development within places, as part of relationships, as part of new development happening within parishes, towns, areas across the country, and thinking about the relationship between developers, between parish town councils, and the benefits, or otherwise in some cases, that can spring from strong relationships and strong engagements. We've got a range of different speakers, and I'll introduce them briefly, but they might want to put a bit more flesh on the bones as they come on and say where they're speaking from. So we're going to start off with Jonathan Werran, Chief Executive of Localis. Then going to move on to Martin Hamilton, who's Director of the Leeds Civic Trust, but also speaking on behalf of Civic Voice. Cllr Andrew Irwin, who's a Chairman of the Parish Council at Tangmere, down in Chichester District. One of my colleagues, Ellen Timmins, Associate Director in Planning for Countryside Properties, and then myself going to finish off a few remarks at the end. And the idea is we're going to have those presentations, thoughts from those people in that order, and then take questions, discussion at the end of the session. So that's, without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Jonathan. I know some people have got slides and will share their screen, but I'll hand over to Jonathan to take it away. Thanks so much.
Many thanks, Andrew, for setting all this up and for the opportunity to talk about building communities. My name's Jonathan Werran. I am the Chief Executive of Localis. We are an independent, place-focused, place-obsessed think tank that exists to put place at the heart of national policy making and fight the good localist fight. Hurrah. Look, thanks for the opportunity to talk about our work. I've got a small slide deck. I'll share screen later. But look, thanks for the opportunity. There is perhaps no greater issue driving division in British politics than the serious gap between aspirations for home ownership and the malign effects of constrained supply. Like even in the news today, picking up Spectator, since the pandemic started, housing values have increased 15% at a time we went through the biggest recession in 300 years. Something's going to have to give here. And the situation is simply one in which we're not building or supplying enough affordable homes in places not just where people wish but need to live. And it's an unhappy reality for a younger generation seemingly permanently priced out of the housing market. So that's kind of the pessimism. As G.K. Chesterton said, pessimism's 10 a penny. The true revolutionary has to be the optimist. So if we want to turn the tide of the times and to render a more rational housing market, one which we broaden for a wider affordable mix of property types and tenures, we're going to have to face down and overcome this with a sense of creativity and optimism, the current broken system. And it's with this in mind that Andrew and colleagues at Countryside commissioned Localis to look at what a good model of community engagement that has the future in mind should look like. At which case time I'm going to get into the presentation. So yeah, so building communities, planning for a clean and good growth future was the commission. And the aims and objectives of the research we agreed with Andrew and colleagues is to look at the role of developers in boosting local productivity and well-being, looking at the role, potential of new development in pushing environmental goals. From the local state angle, what's the role of local government as a partner in the above? And from below, how can central government support by setting a facilitatory planning policy. And the idea was to produce a policy report with recommendations for developers, local authorities, and communities. This was very much focused on the community. Right. The recommendations on the planning process, engagement, and collaboration for central government, local government, developers, and community groups. We want to focus on some of the more popular aspects of the planning bill around cutting bureaucracy and raising the accessibility of the planning process. And particularly, we wanted to look at concrete, genuine, real-life examples of community collaboration in getting new homes built, particularly via neighbourhood plans, to stress the value of honest engagement between authorities, developers, and communities in the context of 300,000 national housing targets and all that means. So essentially, we looked in this report at the role of community in planning at different scales: national, the 300,000 target, the strategic, the local, and down to the neighbourhood level. So in looking at good and the clean, we focused on key themes. In terms of placemaking and community, we looked at community participation, public health, environmental conditions, cultural investment, and the provision and revenue streams to make social infrastructure last. In terms of what makes places give economic purpose, to make this hanger and co here, we looked at the role of local economic anchors, major employers in areas. We looked at the ability to raise skills in areas. From the last spending review, a lot of focus on that. Looked at better use of procurement strategies, social procurement and the like, as well as, and there's really a corollary to better skills, better jobs too, as well as the importance of driving better inward investment. So what we did uncover, I know a lot was hiding in plain sight when it came to how elements of the planning process are still undertaken, especially around visibility and community involvement. You might see there on the right, Arthur Dent from Douglas Adams' sci-fi comic masterpiece, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The reason for that is that in our research, we found that it's still the case that way more than 9 in 10 authorities do not have an easily accessible way of explaining the development plans in their local areas in no kind of holistic way. In many cases, you have a list of PDF versions of individual planning notices, often hard to find and not particularly any good. And this sense of hiding in semi-plain sight indicates we haven't moved on far from Eric Pickle's lament when he was local government secretary in 2014. It's the same as The Hitchhiker's Guide in the sense that as Arthur Dent's home is being demolished by the council, he's told by planning officers that the notice has been in the council's display department for the last 9 months, a department located in the basement, in a disused lavatory, without a light or stairs, in the bottom of a locked filing cabinet, with a sign on the door saying, "Beware of the leopard." So as far as digital planning, community engagement in the 21st century is concerned, we're still living...
It's Fodo here.
Fodo, sorry.
An email with
Fodo, you're on... Fodo, could you mute
evaluations
yourself,
of all
please?
of the bits and bobs that I left.
She's not listening.
But there's quite a few things that aren't on there.
Shall I talk over, Andrew?
And
yeah, there's quite a lot. There's stuff that doesn't work properly. That's the problem.
oh, okay. No, I meant like I left.
Is anyone able to mute
a
Fodo?
load of tripod and
No.
other single, I don't know what you call them,
How can one compete with
stands
this?
and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, most of the stands, apart from there's a Gitso, there's a taller Gitso, which is a 255.
Okay.
The rest of them really are the most.
Fodo, sorry, can you hear us?
Oh, okay.
Fodo? No.
Unfortunately, it's got a tape over the centre.
What's the boy to do, Andrew? Shall I try shouting above?
Yeah, you carry on. I'll see if I can. I don't have any access, so I'm going to leave the room and come back.
Okay.
Okay, so look.
Right, that's okay. So, because I was thinking.
And pretty much, the same
could I come and
applies
pick up all
to
the sort of bits bits and bobs.
principal councils when it comes to
box that
considering
had,
community hubs and spaces. So
various sort of, I'm not sure.
there's a lot that's not particularly visible
sure what all
here.
of them are.
Yeah,
Come
most
out
of
of
it's
this.
all bits and pieces, like little lens cases and
Yeah.
some filters. And we got lots of filters. There's an M&S bag with lots of bits in.
That was yeah, and a box. I'm not sure what the cardboard box contains.
So let's get this going again. So
That's really the
All right.
what are the
I now have the power, as even more power than Jackie Weaver possibly. But right, I've done it.
Well done, He-Man.
Carry on.
Okay, so there's the context. Now, a lot isn't visible, and principal authorities don't particularly consider community hubs, spaces, and social infrastructure. What are the answers? And this is what our report, Building Communities, sought to address. We need reform. We need a far better approach to managing all the various interests at stake. Greater rights, better responsibilities on councils, developers, and empowerment of communities. Central government must, and I guess though, it's getting to understand the sheer necessity of community involvement. I think in that context, Andrew, it's quite useful having sort of Danny Kruger as Michael Gove's PPS. You saw Michael Gove very much for like the street vote proposal and in the Commons earlier in the week. So in terms of getting that broad understanding of place about how to maximise the value of development for all parties. So in that context, we brought out our report, Building Communities, Planning for Good and Clean Growth for the party conference season. And essentially what this is a vision for what a bottom-up community-driven planning system can achieve. And so the premise is when we're talking about new housing, we are in effect talking about the creation of new communities, but communities which will obviously need to sit comfortably within the local economy and social setting where they're sited. As far as the policy challenge goes, it's not merely to manufacture, but it's to generally engender popular community consent for new homes where they're most needed within existing communities. And if in terms of like the wider picture, true sustainability in the sense of creating for the long-term flourishing of people and places, then each actor in this housing dance, central government and its agencies, most notably Homes England, our principal local authorities, developers and communities alike are going to have to play their unique role in planning for and realising what good and clean growth looks like. When it comes to planning, well, if it's well resourced and astutely directed, planning can underscore these housing and, dare we call it, levelling up ambitions. For that to occur, obviously you've had a spending review, a lot of the money's been promised for the foreseeable, but we do think it's fair for the Treasury to carry a fairer share of the burden towards affordable and mixed tenure and sustainable housing in the era of net zero, heating and energy and all that true. And when it comes to addressing the challenge of engendering genuinely local consent for new housing, the new models of design codes as locally approved and commonly agreed styles for local homes, that's a good thing. The office for place could be a champion for community consent. And this leads us back into the community, the stewardship model as we saw. So I'm going to get back into the presentation here. So in terms of what can central government do more for our money, a capacity fund for neighbourhood planning. If you want it, you value it, invest in it for communities. At the same time, a carbon offsetting fund for development. Developers need the surety that they're not good, that their commercial model isn't going to be hauled under the waterline by net zero targets and the like. Other recommendations, for the infrastructure levy, get it paid at the point of commencement on site and include a ring-fence share for affordable housing provision. Includes health impact assessments as a requirement in the NPPF. Also in the NPPF, define and protect social infrastructure, use the NPPF as a guardian of this. And in terms of the visibility, work to develop a centralised portal where residents everywhere can access and see the development plans and decisions for their area in their entirety and in one place. Going on beyond that a bit, central government in their approach must acknowledge the need for a regional approach to new building. One size won't fit all. Garden cities in the southeast have different needs to brownfield in the Midlands. And you know, for our money, the creation of new boards for regional spatial planning is a good thing. And it's something we had a webinar yesterday with friends from the RTPI, that we can include kind of green growth in that too. So this brings us to the sense of a strategic model for a strategic frame. Benefit of stewardship model. Well, local stakeholders need to be working together, pure and simple. They need to be working together towards a shared vision of place, a shared common vision in which everyone knows the needs and priorities, and from that, they're able to work harmoniously to deliver what's needed. So this would entail land built out in a sustainable manner over a set period of years with a proper focus on placemaking. And it can only truly work as a vision if the community share in and understand the context for good growth. Always at the local and the hyper-local level, trust is key, building it and maintaining it. So for the local government ask, community value charters could provide a transparent, clear picture of how procurement around construction is going to benefit communities to give them what they want. Council should work with communities to embed local design codes firmly into neighbourhood plans. In terms of, this kind of fits into that high street renewal, town centre regen, post-COVID, produce cultural statements for new developments containing the provision and protections of cultural assets and ACVs. When it comes to making things clear and transparent, a hybrid model of engagement, digital outreach combined with more extensive physical events. And using their convening power, our principal authorities should organise developers through forums to bridge the gap between developers and communities around new development. For their part, that, you know, as is already happening, that communities should be encouraged and supported to produce neighbourhood plans through parishes or neighbourhood forums in a way that aligns with targets. And this is where we see the need for greater capacity funding. And on the other side of the triangle, final side of the triangle, developers, they should be encouraged to actively contribute to these forums to get strong collective place leadership and strategic planning. They ought to cement that shared vision of place. And through productivity deals agreed with local authority partners, see what they can do through their work to uplift the local labour market, skills, good jobs and wages. And for long-running developments where you're talking about more than 200 builds, let's have a local growth board to oversee a sort of productivity deal. So that's kind of the main recommendations of our report towards a stewardship model for a shared vision of place. I think so Andrew's put the link into the report. We can get that available afterwards, but that is the end of my show. So
Jonathan, thanks very much, and setting the scene and thinking about that from a policy perspective, and some good ideas there in terms of taking things forward. Martin Hamilton from Civic Voice and Leeds Civic Trust next, perhaps to give a few thoughts from his perspective or their perspective in terms of these issues. Martin, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, thanks for the introduction. So Martin Hamilton from Civic Voice. I'm a trustee of Civic Voice, but also I am the director of Leeds Civic Trust. I'm a past retired, I suppose, councillor. I was on Leeds City Council for 12 years, chaired one of the planning committees whilst I was doing that. So I've always had an interest in planning and community involvement. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Civic Trust perspective and then just go into a case study that we've done in Leeds, which I hope is of interest to people and gives a bit of a sense of our how our approach, if you like, to community involvement. So just to say, Civic Voice is a member organisation. We have well over 300 individual civic society, civic trust members, ranging from small villages to large cities. And these are the things that we stand for. So essentially, a strong focus of the Civic Voice movement is around places, buildings, making communities more attractive, encouraging and engendering more community involvement, and engendering promoting civic pride. That essentially is the mission of Civic Voice. So we certainly do believe in a planning system with greater community participation. I think that's very much at the centre of what we do. And of course, you know, the organisations that make up the membership of Civic Voice are already probably more engaged than the wider population because they've chosen to get involved in a civic society or a civic trust. So I guess they're already have that baseline interest in how their communities develop. But of course, the planning system does frustrate local communities, and these are some figures that Grosvenor produced from a study that they did. Very low percentages of trust as far as developers and local authorities are concerned, and our own membership, when they were asked, also felt that influencing the planning process, the planning system, was difficult. 75% people felt that they didn't really have a lot of, or it was hard to influence the planning process. And a large percentage, 84%, wanted to have an earlier voice in the planning process. So I think generally a frustration from the Civic Voice membership around how they can engage in the planning and development process at a local level. So the question really then that I wanted to sort of address through a case study is how can communities play an active role in the planning process? And I wanted to do that by giving you a very brief presentation about a project that we've been running in Leeds in an area that we call the East Side. So you can see from the box there, East Side is an area, for those of you that are familiar with Leeds, that includes the cultural quarter. So it includes the Leeds Playhouse, formerly West Yorkshire Playhouse, a number of cultural institutions, the Leeds bus station, the Leeds Market, the Leeds Minster, those are really on one side of this area that we've been looking at. But a large part of this area is brownfield, a large part is undeveloped. But with planning applications approved for something like 4,000 or 5,000 apartments, which if built out will change this area from an area that is primarily an area that people come to visit the theatre or to work, but actually relatively few people live in it, to one that will actually be a significant residential area. So we felt that it was very ripe for investigation, if you like. The question was, how should we actually go about that investigation? So what we decided to do was to run a competition. So this was our sort of experiment, if you like, in community involvement. So the idea was, and it actually came from a transport perspective, although the actual project is very much about placemaking. So the idea was to say, how do you create a community from an area that is dominated by traffic, dominated by highway, where walking from one side to the other is difficult, where public transport is poor, air quality is poor, and generally the environment as it stands at the moment is poor, given that in the next few years it will be an area where lots of people live. And this is an image that we like to show just to demonstrate how inhospitable the area is. So to walk from the Palace Pub, which is next to the Minster, to Saxton Lane, which is where some council flats are, involves crossing 19 separate lanes of traffic. And this is a walk that should otherwise take 5 minutes, 7 minutes, something like that. So a very inhospitable area at the moment, but one which, as I say, in the fullness of time will become a significant residential part of the city. So we started off with a workshop. We invited people to the workshop to discuss what the issues were. We got some maps out, we got some pens out, we got some post-it notes out. We involved residents, we involved stakeholders, people who live and work in the area. We also brought people from outside. We brought some students in, the local colleges, a whole mixture of people getting round tables just to start to sketch out what the problems were. And then that helped shape the competition that we ran. Now, this coincided with COVID, so what we'd hoped would be a series of more physical workshops ended up being done online, but we had about 20 submissions. The winning entry, Hannah Beard on the left-hand side. The youngest entrant was this lad called Finn, 9-year-old chap who had some ideas about what could happen to the area. So the idea was that anyone could enter, from professional architects firms to community groups to individuals, and we weren't making any judgments about the quality of the submissions. It was really all about getting really identifying some really positive, strong ideas as to how the area could be improved. And so we had a variety of entries. These are some images from those entries, which identified how we could move forward. And then what we did is we pulled together all of these ideas into a document, identifying a number of moves that we felt could be made that drew on all of the competition entries to improve the environment, to improve the setting of what will become a new residential district of the city. We also had a sound walk, and the winning entry, the woman who put the winning entry in actually obtained some sponsorship to produce this billboard, which is a collage of some of the ideas from all of the entries about how this area could be improved. And then this is a group of people who went on the walk, hearing from local residents. So as they were walking across the area in their earphones, they were hearing comments from local residents about what their hopes and fears for this area were. And so quite a nice and interesting way of people experiencing this area of the city. And then the next stage, and this is the stage that we're really on now, is to consult on those ideas that were generated from the competition. We've been involved, we've kept Leeds City Council informed throughout this process. And Leeds City Council made it clear that whilst they support the aspirations, they don't have the resources at the moment to support this in any practical sense. So in fact, we've taken it upon ourselves to develop our own supplementary planning documents. So we've actually produced a draft SPD, which brings together these areas, these ideas, which we're now consulting on via an interactive digital map, but also through meetings with people, residents, employers, stakeholders, people who pass through the area, such as college students. They'll now form part of our consultation group to refine this document. And so that really is just an example of how one way that we think is a way of engaging communities, particularly in an area where it's hard to define what the community is. There will be a future community. At the moment, what you have are a series of disparate organisations, people who pass through the area but maybe don't live in it. So how do you actually deal with that sort of consultation? It's quite tricky, actually. So I think some of the thoughts I had was, should community groups be allowed to undertake work that local authorities no longer have the resources to do themselves, which essentially is what we've been doing in this part of the city. And then how do you give the work that those organisations do credibility? How do you actually, to what extent can you give credence to what they've done? When should a local authority and others step in? And how do you manage the expectations and aspirations of the stakeholders? There are major landowners, obviously, in this area of Leeds who haven't yet built their developments. How do you involve them? How do you take them along in the process? So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Martin, thanks very much for that. And what we're going to do is go from a larger scale in terms of a city to a village perspective, and I'm going to ask Councillor Andrew Irwin, Chair of Tangmere Parish Council, to say a few words. Andrew, over
Thank
to you.
you, Andrew, for that introduction. Tangmere Parish Council sits on the south coast of England, 3 miles east of Chichester and 6 miles north of Bognor, on a floodplain overlooking the South Downs. I've lived here for 25 years and I've been involved in the parish council for most of that time. So there have been a series of local consultations and village questionnaires over the past 20 years aimed at identifying the aspirations of local residents in relation to the proposed expansion of the Tangmere village. The village design statement of 2002 envisaged up to 200 new homes on brownfield locations in the village. Tangmere at the Crossroads in 2004 developed these issues identified in the survey and examined the options for up to 500 homes on the airfield site and the potential for up to 600 homes on green fields to the west of the community. The Tangmere Action Plan of 2005 identified the Tangmere Top 10 aspirations, from traffic calming, improved cycle routes, connecting the village to its wider community. It also aimed to restrict housing development to 300 homes. The plan was updated in 2008 and reported on the delivery of many of those desires, but fundamentally recognised that parish action plans carried no weight in the planning process. On the 1st of February 2014, a public meeting was held following the designation by Chichester District Council on the 23rd of July 2013 of the whole of the parish of Tangmere as a neighbourhood area for the purposes of preparing a Tangmere neighbourhood plan. March 2016 saw the publication of the post-examination version of the plan, which included the following statement by John Slater, the examiner into the Tangmere neighbourhood plan. The parish council and the steering group, aided by the task groups, have risen to the challenge when faced with the allocation of 1,000 homes and new employment allocation on the edge of their village. They have worked with the developers and their consultants collaboratively, and together they have grasped the opportunity that neighbourhood planning offers, and the Tangmere community has set down clear planning principles to guide the house builders and their master planners. This is a good example of positive community planning that recognises that development is coming and clearly states how they expect new housing areas to be developed. The outcome of the consultations over the years has consistently identified significant issues that are of importance to residents. And it is interesting to note that the same issues featured in the Tangmere neighbourhood plan as were first identified in 2002. Piecemeal development since the RAF left in 1970 had resulted in insufficient infrastructure investment. So residents sought new community facilities, more cycle routes, equipped play areas near new housing. Traffic calming includes safer crossing points, and for the parish council to assess the shortfalls in village amenities and open spaces to meet the needs of the existing and new householders who will move to those new housing. In July 2014, the State of the Parish report, it was noted that Chichester District Council's Policy 18, Tangmere Strategic Development Location, encompassed all the aspirations arising from the consultation exercises conducted by the Parish Council. Specifically, Policy 18 supporting text included an assurance that social and community facilities will be provided along with residential housing, addressing the local community aspirations, including a high-level strategy for green infrastructure provision at strategic development sites. In August 16, the Parish Council produced a briefing report for the evolving Tangmere Master Plan, which translated the neighbourhood plan and Policy 18 aspirations into a detailed framework. This report was the result of 2 workshops held in July 16, which gave further definitions to spatial diagram and supporting policies set out in the neighbourhood plan in order to explore and agree the key principles for a development framework to guide the production of a comprehensive master plan. The briefing report was designed to deliver one village concept, which is at the heart of the neighbourhood plan, including the clustering of new community facilities open spaces and amenities around the western edge of the existing community to create a new shared village centre where the old and the new come together. The result of the ongoing conversation with residents over the years was that the reality of the development became accepted, and positives arising from the opportunities for improved infrastructure and facilities became the focus for discussion. So when Countryside Properties held presentations and public meetings and used a neighbourhood plan as the foundation for their presentation, residents were on the same page, making the consultation more rewarding and positive. Residents felt there was a common objective that they were working towards, resulting in a more cooperative and productive discussion. Many developers promote a scheme that does not always sit comfortably with the residents' understanding of the options. So being able to use a neighbourhood plan to drive the master planning was an unusual and helpful tool for the presentations. The outline planning application submitted to Chichester District Council by Countryside Properties, endorsed on the 20th of April 2020, was supported by Tangmere Parish at the Planning Committee because the application represented a true vision of the neighbourhood plan, capturing all the infrastructure and amenity objectives that the parish had been working with the community to deliver. Sitting squarely at the heart of the neighbourhood plan and the master plan briefing report is the concept of one village. This is because successive piecemeal developments since the 80s failed to address the needs, nor were able to deliver an identifiable centre of the community. The proposed village main street includes a two-form entry primary school, retail outlets, village square, community facilities, and an open circulation area will create a link between the existing and the new that provides a setting for a shared village centre. This provision is fundamental to the successful integration of the existing village and the new development, and therefore delivery of this community facility is essential for the success of the project. It is therefore incredibly important that all aspects of the main street are delivered in order to create sufficient footprint to support the various commercial and community enterprises planned for the main street. The largest single challenge which needs to be faced and overcome is any attempt to dilute the provision of such facilities at the heart of the village, as the area should be adaptable for play, community events, and the incidental social interactions that are essential to a healthy community. It needs to provide a place of arrival and activity, a place for meetings and events, a place for playing and staying, and not just a place of passage. I believe what we've got on our outline planning application provides that, and I'm looking forward to working with Countryside to deliver it. Thank you.
Andrew, thanks so much for that. And I'm going to pass over to Ellen Timmins from Countryside, who's sort of been leading on this project to do a bit more detail from her side, from her perspective.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew, and yeah, thank you, other Andrew, as well for your positive comments there. And we're certainly looking forward to working with the parish moving forwards as well. So, yeah, hi everyone. My name is Ellen Timmins, and I'm Associate Planning Director at Countryside Properties. For those of you that don't know us, Countryside develops private and affordable homes through partnerships with landowners, registered providers, and local authorities. We have a particular focus on urban regeneration schemes, as well as delivering landscape-led new communities, such as that proposed at Tangmere. So I do have a few slides that I'm going to attempt to share with you. So hopefully you can see those okay. So yeah, just from following on from Andrew's presentation, I just wanted to share a little bit more with you about our approach to engagement from a developer perspective. But before I kind of delve too much into what we did, I think it's important to kind of step back and consider why we as developers look to engage with communities as well. So as Andrew touched on, at Tangmere, we were actually appointed as the District Council's development partner in 2018. So well after the site was allocated in the local plan, and as you've heard, the site already had a very long history by that point. So there'd been an awful lot of good work that had been done through the neighbourhood plan and the master plan briefing report, and we were very keen to learn from that and build on that through our scheme as well. So it was important to us that we wanted to be able to bring the community on that journey with us as we started to progress the project and develop the master plan and the outline planning application. to be able to brief people on what we were working on and to share as much information as possible to help build trust and to encourage people to engage with us in the design process. And also it's a good way of helping to manage kind of any misinformation that might be out there about what may or may not happen on a scheme as well. So in order to deliver the best place possible for Tangmere, we had to understand what the existing community's priorities were for the site and to help inform the design of the scheme as it evolved. And the best ways to do that ultimately is to sit down and talk to people, and building that line of communication with the parish and the wider community, and developing those relationships does take time, but it is a long-term project, and we're going to be working alongside each other for probably the best part of the next 10 years or so. So it's important to us to build that relationship, and from our perspective, the earlier we can start that conversation with the community, the better for everyone, hopefully, and the better outcomes we can deliver together. So in terms of what we actually did, the first thing we did, I think, actually, was we had a meeting with kind of key community leaders, so including Andrew and the local ward member as well, to kind of introduce ourselves, the team that was going to be working on the project, and to agree an overall approach to engagement. So what we were going to be doing, who we were going to be speaking to, and when we were going to do it. And that gave us a real insight into the parish's priorities. We can do as much research, desk-based research, and read the neighbourhood plan and everything else, but actually sitting down and talking to people gives you a much more better insight into the reasoning behind some of those aspirations and policies within the neighbourhood plan, and also gave us a good opportunity to be able to learn from their local knowledge and previous experiences to identify the best way for us to try and encourage participation when we go out and do our own engagement as well. So to kind of document that process, we produced a version of this programme that's on the slide now, that basically set out the various steps that we were going to take to engage both with the parish, with the wider community, and also with the district council as part of the pre-app process, for everybody to see effectively. So we shared that with the parish council, we put it on our community website. So hopefully a very kind of transparent process and a kind of firm commitment from us that so everybody's got a programme that we're working to and that we can be held accountable against as well. And one of the first kind of actions that came out of that initial meeting was actually a follow-up on site, where we walked the site together with members of the parish council, members of our kind of technical design team as well, to help identify key opportunities and constraints on the ground. So for instance, it was on that first site visit where someone, and I forget who now, pointed out that there was a particular spot when we were walking on the site that had very clear views towards the existing church in Tangmere, the Hornicle Windmill in the South Downs National Park, and the spire of Chichester Cathedral. And we talked about how great it would be if we could celebrate and incorporate those views within the master plan itself by positioning the open space and the green corridors within the site in such a way that you could actually frame those within the development. And that very early on became a kind of key structure and principle that formed the basis of our evolving master plan, building on the principles that the parish had already established through their briefing report. So following on from that, we then had a series of initial master plan workshops with the parish council. So at the same time that we were doing our own technical assessments and surveys and getting a better understanding ourselves about things like how much land we might need for attenuation ponds, or parts of the site we might need to preserve in situ for archaeology reasons, we were discussing this in real time with the parish, so we could all understand what the art of the possible would be on the site, and to have better informed debates and discussions about potential design solutions as the master plan evolved. Then when it came to engaging with the wider community, we had a series of in-person events. So initially some informal kind of master plan drop-in sessions, and that was followed in due course by a more detailed public exhibition. And alongside and in between those events, we tried very hard to provide regular updates, both digitally through our community website and also through email updates. And the other thing we did actually was provide updates in print as well, particularly through updates in the local village newsletter that goes out bi-monthly, I think. And we've actually found that making use of those existing lines of communication that already exist is a much for the most part, much more effective way of reaching the wider community. So, for instance, another thing we did was go along and had a stall at the village fair shortly before our public exhibition, so we could reach a much wider audience who might not otherwise be able to come along or might not be interested in the separate kind of consultation events that we're running. So I thought I'd just finish up just with a couple of images just from some of the events that we held. As you can see, they're all pre-COVID, but hopefully just shows how many people you can get engaged in the process when you do it in the right way and with the right intentions. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellen, very much. And I'm going to carry straight on. I want to leave some time for questions, so I'm going to whiz through the next slides. And Ellen, I think you're going to have to press the button because I can't find a way of taking over. So keep going. I just wanted to sort of finish on, and really, you know, Ellen's point picked up in terms of why we do it on specific schemes, but, you know, more broadly, you know, the whole purpose from our perspective is to deliver new communities and new homes that where people love to live, and you know, simplistically, we want certainty, we want clarity, we want to be able to work with communities to make it easier for everybody to get, from our perspective, to get to an outcome that we can then develop and take forward. Next, please. And therefore, as part of that, thinking about the communication, the engagement, thinking about all these issues that everyone's talked about is so important, because if we don't get that right, and if we don't engage early on, and if we don't think about the networks at the different neighbourhood levels and the communities and how you build those together, what we won't do is create communities that are accepted, or communities that will last and flourish and have that longer term stewardship element. Jonathan mentioned, you know, the benefit that development itself can bring through the social economic value. So, for example, investment in training, or through purchasing in the local area, or other things, for investing in local community activities as well. And all those different elements are really important as part of taking a development through the process that we work on. Next, please. And we put this together because what we need to do, the development doesn't just start, or our thought process doesn't just start when we start preparing a planning application or we start engaging with the community. We need to think right up front when we're looking at sites, and we're thinking about how the early design, when we're thinking about how we're going to fund things, taking it all the way through the process, design, placemaking, planning, and then actually on site and how we engage, you know, because it's all very well getting planning permission, but then there's lots of mud on the road, simplistically, you know, when things actually develop, and how that ongoing relationship continues to make sure that relationship is there, and the dialogue that Ellen talked about. Next, please. So, which brought us to sort of 4 key strands, which are on the next slide, which I sort of started off on. So the engagement element, the empowerment, about giving people a voice, and Andrew Irwin from Tangmere sort of spoke. We didn't give that voice, but, you know, having a community that had that voice and clarity to enable them to take more control, and then taking that on in terms of that partnership element, to taking things forward in that partnership, but thinking about that long-term nature of development, because development doesn't just happen and stop. It's about making sure that you set things up for the long term as well. And Ellen picked up some of those in terms of the design characteristics, or Andrew talked about the usage of spaces. Well, I think I'll stop there because we've had a ping up saying we've got about 5 minutes left. So very conscious that we're up against time, but I'm interested in, do you want to take the slides down, Ellen? Interested in various, if there's any comments or questions from our audience. Otherwise, I will try and pick some out. But is anyone who's listening got a question? You can either stick your hand up, come off mute. There's not that many of us, so I don't mind how people do it, or stick it in the chat. Anybody want to pick something up?
Perhaps Photo can intervene again, Andrew.
Oh, Photo's apologised, so she thought her mic was muted. So that's.
I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I don't know what you heard. Me talking to London Camera Exchange. Get that conversation?
Briefly, and then I managed to mute you, so that's fine.
So sorry.
That's okay. All part of the communication tool, isn't it? And Ellen, it's interesting. I mean, just I'll kick off a minute, but it's interesting. You know, Ellen was mentioning the photos that she showed were all pre-COVID, and we've done some similar events post, both in the middle of lockdowns, but also since then. And it's interesting, and I don't know whether Martin might comment in terms of how he's reached different communities within Leeds, but we've found that sometimes it depends how, we've put brochures out to every household, but then had webinars and podcasts that people can download and look into. And actually, it's probably broadened out. Ellen was talking about trying to broaden the range of communities getting involved, but broadening out the numbers of people at whatever time they wanted were able to download and view the information. But Martin first, I didn't know if you got any thoughts about that.
I agree. I mean, I think generally the excluded groups are fewer through digital. Actually, is my general sense. You have to be keen to turn out to a meeting, to actually go into a community centre or whatever and spend some time, knowing that you probably are committing that amount of time. If you're picking up something, a podcast or joining an online meeting, you're not having to traipse out of the house to do so. You can dip out if you find that it's not for you, but you probably will get more people, I suspect, getting involved in those sorts of conversations. So I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a mixture of the two, and I think that's what we've probably learned, isn't it? That actually having both of those options available to people is a real positive. Yeah.
Thanks, Martin. Andrew, coming to you. I mean, I was thinking back to when you were talking about the neighbourhood plan process, and I'm wondering how you broadened that out to reach that broader range of people that are important in terms of picking up all parts of society.
Thank you. We've got a newsletter that goes around. Ellen mentioned that, and we always had a page on there, and all the parish councils are walking around the village and talking to the people. When we call a meeting, we put posters up on the lamp posts, and we publicise it in lots of areas. We quite frequently get 100 people at a meeting to talk about this. And I just anecdotally want to say that one meeting where I suggested we increase the number of houses we were asking for from 1,000 to 1,300 to protect other green spaces, I actually got applauded. Not many parish councils can say that happened.
Oh, no, definitely not. Applauding for more housing. Well, that's good. Jonathan, did you have any thoughts about that, just in terms of wrapping up, in terms of both in terms of the level of community and any thoughts in terms of putting things together at the end?
Yeah, I think it's very, very timely, this sort of presentation coming now. But when we wrote our report, Andrew, we were waiting for Godot, waiting for the Housing and Planning Bill. Michael Gove's chosen to assess it. But I think what we're hearing, aren't we, with sort of what's being planned, that kind of, and the political calculus around this is essentially that the government now sees the very sense in genuine community engagement, whether it be in the form of, say, popular street votes or better neighbourhood plans and popular design codes, as the only solution to getting homes built where they need to be built, or in a way that's accepted by the communities in them. So I think this is I think that the most important thing that can be done is to share the best practice from Tangmere, who we picked up you were in our report as a great exemplar of doing this extremely well. And so more of it would be my kind of concluding remark.
Oh, Andrew, you're on mute, sorry.
Oh, I sorry. Thank you very much. I'll draw that to a close now. Thank you all very much for popping in and seeing us. To get out of this room, bottom right, there should be a leave room button. You can go back and choose your next breakout. You've got 2 or 3 minutes to go and get a quick drink before your next session starts. But thank you all very much, and thank you again to the speakers.